Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is a lovely July 23rd here in suburban Chicago. The temperature is pleasant, but not overly warm. The construction crews across the street from me are up and at it bright and early, as they should be, or I would be if I had the potential to work early and then not have to work in the blazing heat of the middle of the day. And I'm out for a walk. Well, I did get a little bit of response for my episode my two-part series exploring my favorite game mechanisms in response to the game mechanisms that Nick Shaw posted. Regular listener Kris Hickman came into the forum and posted his response to my response, and then suggested some more game mechanisms to talk about. So I thought we'd just jump right in and keep this rig rolling. So this is, what am I calling this episode? This is my favorite games of the 7 game mechanisms plus 3 more. We'll say my favorite games of 10 more game mechanisms as suggested by Kris Hickman. I don't know, can I call it part 3 if the previous one had a different name? I'm still doing it part 3 because I want this whole thing to sort of be seen as one odyssey. So what I did is I took the 7 game mechanisms that Kris asked about, and I added 3 more so that I have a total of 10 more to talk about. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to sort of alternate down the list and talk about 5 of them today and then 5 of them in the next episode. And once again, I did not do any prep for this, with the exception of looking up a couple of the mechanisms names to make sure that I knew what they were, but I tried not to think about what games I would talk about as I did this, so that you get the poorly prepared live spontaneity that you've come to enjoy about the Pick Up and Deliver podcast. So let's just jump right into it. The first one Kris asked about was rondels. Now it's interesting, I don't know, maybe it's not interesting. It's interesting to me that a rondel is not a game mechanism I have a ton of experience with. I have played some rondel games, probably most significantly Trajan is the rondel game from Stefan Feld that has a bunch of different mechanisms, but the central action choice mechanism is this little rondel where you have these, I have no idea narratively what's supposed to be happening here, but you have these little bowls, and you pick up the bowl, you pick up pieces and move them around, actually in a kind of Mancala style. So I guess that's not a rondel then, it's a Mancala. Huh. So never mind about Trajan, I guess. So what other rondel games have I played? Well, certainly there's Shipyards, which I believe when I reviewed it on the show sometime last year, I called it, I used the old Yo Dog, I heard you like rondels, so here's some rondels on your rondels. Shipyards has, I believe, four different rondels that you're using, and some of those rondels are doubles. So, in case anybody is finding themselves a little lost, as I clearly am, a rondel is a action selection mechanism in which there's a circuit of choices, and you get to take your choice by moving your piece forward on that circuit. Generally, the further ahead you move, the more you have to pay some sort of penalty. And so like if you take the next action, it's free. If you take 2 actions down the line, you have to pay some money or something. Lots of games have used this. It's a good mechanism because generally it encourages you to take a variety of different actions, but if you really want to and have the insight to sort of spot the crucial moment, seeing the time when it's worth it to pay extra to do that great action is a strong motivator. So, as I think about it, I know that some people think of Great Western Trail as a rondel game, and it does have that circuit, but generally the circuit is so long that it doesn't really feel all that much like a rondel to me, but I guess it technically is one. I like that game quite a bit, or at least I did the once or twice that I've played it. Then there's Shipyards, like I said, which has 4 rondels. There's the main action selection rondel. Then there are 3 different rondels for the things you would get from those actions. So, for instance, if you took an action that would get you a technology improvement for your ship, you then can move this token forward on the improvements rondel to pick which improvement you get or which combination of improvements you would get. The same goes for raw materials that you would get and so on. Now, I know that supposedly Matt Gertz, the designer of Concordia and Transatlantic, is the big rondel guy. That's often I've heard him referred to as the king of rondels, but I haven't played any of his rondel games. So I guess I'm going to have to say Shipyard, but I'm a little sad to say it's almost by default, because I haven't played that many games that use rondels, or I can't think of any, which, I don't know, reduces their significance somewhat. So I'm going to say Shipyard, but it is a mechanism I'd be interested in playing some more of. So if any of you have recommendations for some rondel games I should try, let me know. All right, the next one I'm going to mention is deductive reasoning. So there's a number of deductive reasoning games. I talked about this a little bit in the mystery game section that I was talking about last time. I guess something like Cryptid would be a top choice. Clue is actually a pretty good game if you get rid of the roll to move element. If you just make it a game about solving a puzzle quickly, I think Clue is actually pretty great, or has some pretty great elements. Decrypto would be a party game that I think fits this element, although there's not as much elimination as there could be. I think the Mysterium is a deductive reasoning game, although the elements that lead you to those deductions are difficult. But each time you make a guess, you're reducing the number of things that it could be. And then, Mastermind. When it comes down to, if you haven't played Mastermind, it's an abstract puzzle game where you're trying to figure out the code produced by somebody else using clues regarding which things are correct and which things are not. I really do like Cryptid. I think it's a great game. I'm going to say Cryptid is my favorite deductive reasoning game, although Mastermind is a close second. The one thing I like about Cryptid, I guess, is that it's got a little bit more life to it in terms of being wow, this lady just turned right in front of me. No turn signal at all. No awareness that there was a pedestrian walking. Glad I was paying attention instead of talking about board games with my friends. Cryptid, I know I've described it on the show before, but in the game, one spot, or everyone is looking for a single spot on the board where the creature could be hiding. Narratively, you're looking for Bigfoot or whatever, but really it's an abstract puzzle game. Everybody's looking for one spot on the board and trying to figure out where is that one spot. And each person has one clue. And your clue might be, it's not within 2 spaces of a tower, or it is not on water or forest. And so you have some percentage of the map that you're able to eliminate yourself, and everybody else has one clue as well. And the way the game works is all of these clues, the way they add up together, only one space can fit all of the clues. So the game goes around, you're asking questions and making guesses about where you think the creature might be. And every time you force someone else to reveal a piece of information, then you also have to reveal a piece of information. So there's an interesting give and take where the game makes you balance out the information you're getting and the information you're giving. There's also a really interesting element where when you guess a space, you have to give more information. Like generally, if you guess a space, the way it works is the first thing you say, I'm going to guess, instead of I'm going to ask a question. And when you guess, you put your "it could be here" token on that spot, and everybody else has to follow suit until someone is able to say, no, it's not there. And then you have to go and reveal another space that it couldn't be. But of course, if everyone puts their "it could be here" tokens on there, then you win. Like I said, it's a pretty good game. I really enjoy it, especially if you're using the apps. You don't have to deal with the little papers. But yeah, good time. Cryptid would be my top deductive reasoning game, I suppose. All right, so the next one I want to talk about is deck building. Boy, this is a difficult one for me because I really like deck building games, and I have a bunch of them. Now, to be clear, in deck building here, I'm using what I think has become relatively common parlance, which is if you make your deck before you play it from a big pool of cards, and then you bring some number of cards with you, like in Magic the Gathering or Netrunner or Arkham Horror, the card game. When you do that, that is deck construction. Deck building is a mechanism in which you alter the deck that you're playing with as you play the game. So generally, the most widely known example of this, or the most widely respected example of this, would be Dominion. But there have been many, many games since then that have used this mechanism. Some games that I enjoy that are pretty purely a deck building games would be something like Arctic Scavengers, in which you're assembling a deck, or Valley of the Kings, which I just got recently, but has that slightly older model of building a deck. Or there is Miskatonic School for Girls, which is an old favorite of our families, where you're building a deck, but you're also putting bad stuff in other people's decks. And then there are plenty of games that have started to use, and then something like the Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle, which is a deck building game as well. And most of these, either if they're competitive, you are racing the other opponents, or actively combating them, trying to get a particular thing accomplished in terms of points or timeline or something like that. And then there are some cooperative deck builders like Marvel Legendary or Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle, in which you're using the cards that you're collecting to fight some shared enemy. And then there are a number of games that have come out in the more recent years where the deck building is part of is a subset of some other set of mechanisms. So for instance, Clank is a deck building game, but in it you're moving your piece around the board, so there's also some route planning and some decisions about what elements to pick up, that sort of thing. So Clank is a deck building game, but also other things. Similarly, The Quest for El Dorado is a deck building game, but then you use your deck to move your piece around the board, and you're trying to race to El Dorado. And so that one, again, the deck building is built in as part of that. Some people would point to something like Great Western Trail also uses that. Or the whole series of Martin Wallace games like A Few Acres of Snow and A Study in Emerald and Mythotopia and A Handful of Stars. All of these are games where you're buying cards to put into your deck and you're shuffling your cards. And Martin Wallace likes to have you keep your cards rather than discard them. So that's one of the big differences with his games. But I think deck building is a crucial part of those games. But I don't really think of those as deck building games, because it's not, for me, the central mechanism. The central mechanism for all those games is area control, probably. But they are kind of, mixed. Regarding this conversation that we're having here, I really like to focus on games where the central thing, the main focus thing that you're doing is the mechanism we're discussing. So, like, I'm not super inclined to put the Martin Wallace deck building games with other elements in this one because I don't feel like that's the central thing you're doing. That may come up in another category tomorrow or next time. So, which of these is my favorite? Now, I mentioned a few. The one other one I would put in the hopper to think about is SPQF, which has recently been re-released as Fort from Leader Games. And this is, again, one where you are building a deck and using the deck to do stuff. In this case, manage your resources a bit. So, which game do I want to point to? Definitely not Marvel Legendary or Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle. I like those games fine enough, but the deck building part of that doesn't feel too dramatic to me. Clank is an interesting one because, again, it's a board game, but the deck building is the central mechanism, I would say. And in that game, the deck building is really crucial because if you're not thinking carefully about how you build your deck, you just get stuck. Or you move too fast and you can't fight anything. I'm tempted to say Valley of the Kings because I really enjoy the interplay of the sets that you're trying to collect, the decision about when to dump cards into the tomb, the powers that those cards give you. There's lots of really interesting decisions to be made when you're playing Valley of the Kings. Oh, and from that regard, I'm also reminded of the brilliant Dale of Merchants, which is a deck building game where, again, you are getting rid of cards in order to advance your strategy. Boy, this is a nail biter, Kris. All right, so just thinking on top of my head, it's probably down to Dale of Merchants or Arctic Scavengers or Valley of the Kings. It's not Dominion because I don't like the theme of Dominion. I think it's a little too light for my taste. And I'm eliminating those other games on not being purely deck buildery enough. So as I wrestle with it right now, I think I'm going to leave out Dale of Merchants because I just haven't played it that much. I think if I had played it more and given it some more energy or oxygen, it might rise up. But I just haven't made the time for that. So then there's Valley of the Kings and Arctic Scavengers. Both are great. Both have really good theme. Both have interesting things that you're doing with the cards. It's tough. You know, I think I'm gonna fall Valley of the Kings this time. I know it might be it's got the shine of the new on it. I know it's not a new game, but it's newer to me. But that burying mechanism and the level of interplay between the cards is really pretty incredible. I mean, when you get down to it, Arctic Scavengers is, when you're playing your cards, a lot like a lot of other later deck builders in that you play your card and you get to do a thing. Arctic Scavengers, the interesting thing is it gives you, there's like 4 different actions you can do and different cards will let you activate different actions. That part's interesting. But compared to the specialized powers that are on the cards in Valley of Kings, the really difficult decision of, do I bury this card now or do I keep it, knowing that if I keep it another round and I don't get back to it, I don't get those points. The set collection element, the pyramid, all of these are really interesting and unusual and frankly worth my time. So I'm going to say my favorite deck builder right now is Valley of the Kings. Ooh, that was a tough one. All right, I've done Rondell's, deductive reasoning, deck building. So 2 more to do. We have action selection. So this is an interesting one. I probably should have looked this up, but I'm going to try to explain my thinking on it. So action selection I think of as a game where you have a number of choices of a thing you can do, and then you pick one of those to do on your turn. And maybe you get some sort of auxiliary or secondary action, but generally you're picking one. Often you are limited in the one that you pick in some way. In a worker placement game, you're limited by what other people have picked. In a hand management game like Concordia, you're limited by which cards you have in your hand. But I think those are those other mechanisms. I think the thing that makes action selection work is often you can pick from a menu of actions, but you can't generally take the one you took last time. That's how Scythe does it. There's also Terra Mystica, where you pick the action that you want to do from this menu of things, and you have to pay resources to do it. That's also how the Martin Wallace deck builders work. Like in a study in Emerald, if you want to assassinate someone, you have to play a card that has an assassin ability and then play a number of bombs equal to the security level of the target that you're fighting. And you manage those resources through managing your hand and building your deck. But ultimately, you're selecting from a number of different actions that you can take based on those resources. So action selection, I think, fits that one. So, having kind of described what action selection is, thinking about which games I have. So, if I say those Martin Wallace games are part of the action selection, but again, they're a mix of mechanisms that makes it hard to put them in one category or another. Radis is another one that I've been playing lately that does have that effect. In Radis, you have a couple small things you can do, and you get to do more by picking one of the bonus cards around the table. And the bonus cards that you pick, there's only one of each. So if I want to be the knight, I take the knight from you. But then when the plague comes up, if I have the knight card, I lose people in ways that... so it can be good. You also get stuck. If you take a roll and no one else takes it, you have that roll for the rest of the game. You can't ever divest yourself of one. You only lose it if someone else takes it, which is an interesting twist. So, if it's Radis or Terra Mystica or Scythe... I don't know if I mentioned Scythe yet. I was thinking of it in my head. Scythe is interesting because it uses the action selection mechanism sort of like Terra Mystica, only you can always do all the actions. In Terra Mystica, I can't build a house if I don't have any more resources. In Scythe, I can always move my people, or I can always gather resources. There's always a couple actions you can do, even if you're totally strapped for cash. And there's no rounds, which I think is an interesting shift. I wonder if in that regard, Clans of Caledonia is also an action selection game. If I'm saying Terra Mystica is, they're basically the same game, or very, very similar. Given the nuances of action selection, as I've discussed it here, I think I'm going to go with Scythe. I really enjoyed my plays of Scythe, although I haven't played it in the way that almost anyone else has. Because my plays of Scythe have been almost entirely two-player. I played through the campaign with my buddy Paul, and so my whole Rise of Fenris campaign was a two-player game. So I've only played a handful of multiplayer games of Scythe. That said, I do really like the central premise of the game, which is, you have these 4 spots you can go to do a thing, and you go there and do it, and then you pass the turn on to the next person. And so the action selection elements of Scythe I find really great, and also highlights the selection part. It's possible that I'm misinterpreting or misremembering the idea of the action selection, but Terra Mystica, you pick one action to do of these many that you can, but you have to have the resources to do it. And then you have the rounds that end. Yeah, I think I'm going to say Scythe is my favorite action selection game. Hopefully that is actually an action selection game. And then finally, the last one I'm going to do today is Hidden Roles. This is one I added to the list. Kris gave me 7, but to be able to do 5 a day, I need 10. So I'm going to use Hidden Roles. There's a couple different options here for hidden roles. One is the social deduction game, where some people have a hidden role of traitor and other people don't, and you're trying to figure out who they are. That's probably the purest form of hidden roles. But then you also have games like Lords of Waterdeep and Nanty Narking, which used to be Discworld. And in these games, you choose you have secret goals or secret motives that shape how you play. And a big part of the game is trying to figure out other people's secret goals. And I don't have to think about it very long. So if I'm thinking about social deduction games, which definitely involve hidden roles, the Resistance is obviously top of my list. I like it better than Werewords or One Night Werewolf or Secret Hitler. The Resistance, tops the list of those kinds of games for me. Although there's also Burke's Gambit, which is a pretty good, nice light one that meets a lot of the same requirements for me. But then when I'm thinking about hidden roles in other kinds of games, Nanty Narking comes to the top of the list, because I think that, the really interesting element of trying to balance your own desire to win with the possibility of somebody else having a different role that they're trying to use to win is really interesting and crucial there. So Nanty Narking comes to the top of the list. That's it. So then the question is, if I'm thinking of both social deduction games and these sort of other kinds of hidden role games, and I'm asking which one do I like better, I think I'm going to say Nanty Narking. I really like that game. I think the delicious tension of, do I risk that the other person has met their condition in order to put myself in a position to win, or do I spend my energy blocking them, is a really delicious one, and one that I found pretty fun as I've been playing the game more. And so in that way, I'm going to say Nanty Narking is my favorite hidden roles game. All right, so that's 5. We're going to come back one more time for part 4 with the next episode. In the meantime, I'm interested to hear from you. What are your favorite rondel, deductive reasoning, deck building, action selection, and hidden role games? Pop over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269, and I would say, join the thread that Kris started about parts 1 and 2. We might as well make the whole thing one big conversation. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the mechanisms I talked about today. If you want to reach out to me directly, you can email me, brendan@rattleboxgames.com, or hit us up on Twitter, rattleboxgames.com, or rattleboxgames. We will see it eventually, although we're not on Twitter that often. So, well, that's about it for me today. I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.